The autumn air in Chicago carried a mix of hope and tension as Senator Michael Harris adjusted his tie in the passenger seat of his black SUV. His wife Angela, at the wheel, navigated through the South Side neighborhoods where Michael had grown up. Campaign posters bearing his image and the slogan, "Progress through Unity," dotted the storefronts and lamp posts. "We're making good time," Angela said, checking her watch. "The community center's expecting you at 7. She glanced at her husband, noting the familiar determination in his eyes. At 52, Michael carried himself with the dignity earned through decades of public service, his salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes projecting both authority and approachability. Michael reviewed his speech notes one last time. The upcoming address at the Thompson Community Center would focus on police reform and community investment, issues that had defined his career. "These neighborhoods deserve better than empty promises," he said, his deep voice filling the car's interior. "We need real change, starting with how law enforcement interacts with our community." The flashing lights appeared suddenly in their rearview mirror. Angela checked her speed. She hadn't been speeding. She pulled over carefully, following protocol as she'd learned to do years ago. 2 officers approached, one on each side of the vehicle. Officer Eric Brown, a white man in his early 30s, approached the driver's side while Officer Jenna Smith, also white and in her late 20s, took position at the passenger window. "License and registration," Officer Brown demanded, his flashlight beam harsh in Angela's eyes. She complied, hands visible on the steering wheel. Michael remained still, knowing from experience how these situations could escalate. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Smith ordered Michael, her hand resting on her holster. Slowly. "Officer, I'm Senator Michael Harris," he said calmly, maintaining eye contact. "I have identification in my jacket pocket." "I said step out of the vehicle." Smith's voice rose sharply. The officers had received an alert about an armed suspect in the area, male, African American, in his 50s. In their minds, Michael fit the description. Michael began to comply, movements deliberate and measured. "I'm reaching for my ID," he announced clearly, his hand moving toward his inner pocket. "Stop. Hands where I can see them," Brown shouted, drawing his taser. The situation escalated in seconds. Angela's protests were drowned out by the officer's commands. Michael froze, hands raised, but the officers were already on edge. "He's reaching," Smith called out, misinterpreting Michael's slight movement to maintain his balance. Before anyone could clarify the situation, Brown fired his taser. The electrodes hit Michael in the chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Angela's scream pierced the night air. "That's Senator Harris. What are you doing?" She reached for her phone, but Officer Smith ordered her to keep her hands visible. Michael lay unconscious on the cold pavement, his speech notes scattered around him. The officers, realizing their mistake, called for backup and medical assistance. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, cell phones recording the scene. Within minutes, social media would light up with videos of the respected senator sprawled on the ground, and the city of Chicago would never be the same. Officer Brown stood over Michael's motionless body, the reality of what just happened starting to sink in. Smith radioed dispatch, her voice shaking, "We need immediate medical assistance. Subject is Senator Michael Harris." The red and blue lights continued to flash across the scene, casting alternating shadows on the growing crowd of witnesses. What should have been a night of community engagement and hope had turned into a flashpoint that would ignite long-simmering tensions in the city. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station, Michael Harris regained consciousness with a splitting headache. His tailored suit was dirty and wrinkled, his dignity stripped away. A young desk sergeant's eyes widened with recognition, followed by panic as he realized who they had detained. "Senator Harris, we had no idea," the sergeant stammered, quickly working to remove the handcuffs. Michael said nothing, his silence more powerful than any words. The muscles in his jaw tightened as he rubbed his wrists, still feeling the ghost of the metal restraints. Across town, Angela paced in their living room, her phone buzzing constantly. The video had gone viral. She ignored calls from major news networks, focusing only on trying to secure her husband's release. Their daughter Maya, a law student at Northwestern, was already on her way to the station with their family attorney. "Mom, it's everywhere," Maya's voice cracked over the phone. "Twitter, Facebook, everything. They're calling it another case of racial profiling. People are gathering outside the station." Angela sank into the couch, exhaustion battling with rage. Her phone displayed a text from Reverend Jackson, a longtime family friend and civil rights leader. "We're mobilizing. This ends now." The police station's phones rang non-stop. Chief Williams, awakened by urgent calls, rushed to handle the situation. He found Officers Brown and Smith in the break room, both pale and silent. Brown's hands shook as he filled out his incident report, realizing his career might be over. "What the hell were you thinking?" Williams demanded, slamming the door. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The mayor's office is breathing down my neck. The governor just called." Outside, news vans began arriving, their satellite dishes stretching toward the sky like metal trees. Social media exploded with hashtags. #Justice for Harris, #Police Brutality, #Enough is Enough. The incident was becoming a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement's treatment of Black Americans. Angela Harris stood on the steps of the police station at dawn, surrounded by a growing crowd of supporters. Her voice, amplified by a megaphone, carried across the assembled faces, "My husband has served this city for 20 years. Last night, he was treated not as a senator, but as a threat. This stops today." The crowd swelled by the hour. Community leaders, church groups, and students merged into a sea of protest signs and determined faces. Local business owners distributed water bottles and hand-drawn signs. The atmosphere crackled with controlled anger and purpose. Inside the station, Officer Eric Brown watched through the blinds, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The faces in the crowd reminded him of his own neighborhood, his own family. A black colleague, Officer James Thompson, stopped beside him. "Never thought it would be you, Eric," Thompson said quietly. "You always seemed like one of the good ones." "I followed procedure," Brown muttered, but the words felt hollow. "Did you? Or did you see what you expected to see?" The protest gained momentum as civil rights organizations arrived with prepared chants and organized march routes. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live feeds of the growing demonstration. Police officers in riot gear began to assemble, creating an uncomfortable mirror image of the protesters. Social media amplified the message. Live streams showed the peaceful but passionate crowd, their signs telling stories of similar encounters, similar fears. #Voices for Change trended nationwide. Other cities began reporting solidarity protests forming outside their own police stations. Angela's phone buzzed with a message from Michael, "I'm watching. Keep it peaceful. Change comes through dignity." She looked up at the crowd, now numbering in the thousands, and saw both the pain and the possibility of the moment. Officer Brown slipped out the back door of the station, still in uniform but without his badge. He walked the perimeter of the protest, listening to stories being shared through megaphones. Each testimony hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to confront biases he hadn't known he carried. Officer Eric Brown sat in a quiet diner 2 blocks from the station, across from Officer Thompson. The protest chants echoed faintly through the windows. Thompson stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words carefully. "First time I got pulled over, I was 16, Thompson began. Honor roll student, driving my mother's car to chess club. Ended up face down on the pavement because I matched a description. Sound familiar?" Brown stared at his untouched eggs. "I was doing my job. We had a report dash." "Your job?" Thompson cut him off. "Your job is to protect and serve. Tell me, who were you protecting when you tossed him and reaching for his ID?" Across town, Angela Harris sat in her living room with reporter Sarah Chen from the Chicago Tribune. Camera lights illuminated her composed face as she spoke with controlled fury. "My husband and I have taught our children how to survive police encounters since they were 12. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Announce your actions. Last night, Michael did everything right. He still ended up unconscious on the pavement." The interview aired live, sending shockwaves through social media. In his office at the state capitol, Michael met with his legal team, including civil rights attorney David Martinez. His chest still ached from the taser barbs. "We have a unique opportunity here," Martinez explained, spreading documents across the desk. "Your position as senator, combined with this personal experience, gives us leverage to push for real reform." Michael nodded, rubbing his temples. "I've spent years trying to change the system from the inside. Maybe it took becoming a victim of that system to show me what needs to be done. Back at the diner, Brown's phone buzzed with messages from fellow officers, some supportive, others disappointed. His partner, Jenna Smith, had called in sick, unable to face the mounting pressure. "I never thought of myself as..." Brown struggled with the words. "As what?" "Racist." Thompson leaned forward. "That's the problem, Eric. None of us do. But we're all part of a system that sees threat in black skin first, humanity second." The conversation was interrupted by breaking news on the diner's TV, Senator Harris announcing emergency legislative sessions to address police reform. Brown watched his own body camera footage playing behind the senator's image, seeing for the first time how his actions looked to the world. The state capitol buzzed with tension as Senator Harris took the podium, his presence commanding even more respect than usual. The bruises from the taser were hidden beneath his suit, but the determination in his voice was unmistakable. "Today, I introduce the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act," Michael announced, his words echoing through the chamber. "This bill mandates comprehensive bias training, requires body cameras to be active at all times, and establishes an independent review board for all use-of-force incidents." The chamber erupted in a mix of applause and protest. Police union representatives sat stone-faced in the gallery while reform advocates cheered. Angela watched from the sidelines, noting which legislators seemed supportive and which avoided eye contact. Outside, competing protests clashed verbally. Police supporters waved thin blue line flags, while reform advocates carried photos of victims of police brutality. News crews captured the division, broadcasting split-screen images of the confrontation alongside Michael's speech. In her home, Jenna Smith watched the coverage with growing anxiety. Her phone contained dozens of missed calls from internal affairs. The police union representative had advised her to stay quiet, but each news cycle made her feel more complicit. "The system isn't broken," Michael continued at the podium. "It's functioning exactly as it was designed. Our task is not to fix it, but to rebuild it." The police commissioner held an emergency meeting with precinct captains. "We're hemorrhaging public trust," he stated bluntly. "Harris's bill could reshape every aspect of our operations." Angela faced aggressive questioning from opposition media. "Isn't your husband using this incident for political gain?" She maintained her composure, responding, "When your husband is tossed for reaching for his ID, political gain is the last thing on your mind. This is about survival." Eric Brown sat in his apartment, staring at his badge. His sister had sent him videos of similar incidents from across the country. Each one felt like a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about his chosen profession. Chicago's streets transformed into a sea of protesters stretching from Grant Park to the Magnificent Mile. What began as a local response to Senator Harris's incident had exploded into a national movement. Cities across America erupted in solidarity, their own stories of police brutality fueling the fire. Downtown Chicago became ground zero. Business owners boarded up windows, not out of fear of protesters, but as makeshift canvases for artists who painted murals of justice and change. The city vibrated with the energy of transformation. "We are not here just for Michael Harris," Angela's voice boomed across the crowd. "We are here for every unnamed victim, every traffic stop that turned deadly, every parent who fears for their child's life during a routine police encounter." Michael stood beside her, his presence a powerful symbol. The crowd chanted his name, but he raised his hands for silence. "This movement is bigger than me," he declared. "Look around you. This is what democracy looks like when people say, 'Enough.'" In a surprising turn, Eric Brown appeared at the edge of the protest, out of uniform, wearing a black t-shirt. Some recognized him from the viral video. Whispers spread through the crowd. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but something drove him forward. The police department struggled to maintain control as more officers began questioning their training and protocols. Some joined the protesters during off-duty hours. Others doubled down, arguing that backing down would encourage lawlessness. "They're breaking rank," the police commissioner muttered, watching footage of his officers joining protesters. "We're losing control of the narrative." Social media exploded with new hashtags. Hashtag Cops for Change and hashtag Reform Not Defund trended alongside calls for more dramatic action. The movement was splintering into various factions, each with their own vision of justice. News helicopters captured the scale of the protests, a living, breathing organism of change that snaked through Chicago's streets. The mayor called an emergency meeting as protests began affecting business districts and tourist areas. The breaking point came on a sweltering Saturday afternoon. The city felt like a powder keg, with protests entering their second week. Despite peaceful intentions, the sheer volume of people created unstable situations throughout Chicago. Near Daley Plaza, a line of riot police faced off against protesters. The air thick with tension and summer heat. Officer Brown, now among the protesters, recognized former colleagues behind their shields and face guards. Their eyes met through the plastic visors, former brothers in arms now on opposite sides. "Disperse immediately," boomed the police announcement. "This is an unlawful assembly." The crowd responded with chants, "No justice, no peace." A water bottle arced through the air, thrown by an unknown hand. It struck a riot shield, splashing water across the police line. Within seconds, chaos erupted. The police line surged forward, batons raised. Protesters scattered, some standing their ground, others running. "Stay peaceful." Angela's voice cut through the chaos. She had been addressing the crowd when the confrontation began. Michael grabbed her arm, trying to move her to safety, but she pulled away. "We have to stop this." Eric Brown found himself caught between his former colleagues and the protesters. He watched in horror as officers he'd trained with began swinging batons at unarmed civilians. Without thinking, he stepped between an officer and a young protester. "Stand down, Kevin," he shouted at his former partner. "They're not the enemy." The moment was captured by dozens of phones, a former officer protecting protesters from his colleagues. The footage would soon go viral, but in that moment, Brown only saw the fury in Kevin's eyes behind the riot shield. Tear gas canisters popped nearby, sending white clouds drifting through the crowd. The scene descended into chaos. Screams mixed with police radio chatter and the thud of riot shields against bodies. The steps of the Capitol building became an unlikely meeting ground. Michael Harris, Angela, and Eric Brown found themselves face to face amidst the chaos. The tear gas had dissipated, but tensions remained electric in the air. "Senator," Brown spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been trying to find the right words since that night." Michael raised his hand, silencing him. "Officer Brown, I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in actions. Your presence here says more than words could." Angela stood between them, her eyes sharp with unresolved anger. "Do you understand what you did? Not just to my husband, but to every black person who watched that video and saw their own fears confirmed." Before Brown could respond, a new wave of officers approached, led by his former partner Kevin. They wore full riot gear, face shields reflecting the afternoon sun. The crowd of protesters behind Michael and Angela grew restless. "This is your last warning," Kevin's voice crackled through a megaphone. "Clear the Capitol steps or we will use force." Brown turned to face his former colleagues. "Kevin, these are our neighbors. Our community. We swore to protect them, not terrorize them." The confrontation drew media attention. News cameras captured the scene, the senator, his wife, and the officer who had tossed him, now standing together against a line of riot police. "You're a traitor, Eric," Kevin spat through his face shield. "You chose them over your brothers in blue." "I chose right over wrong," Brown responded, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "Maybe it's time you did too." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Behind the riot police, more protesters began to gather. The Capitol steps had become a stage where the city's future hung in the balance. The standoff at the Capitol steps reached its critical moment. A young protester, no more than 16, broke from the crowd, running toward the police line. Kevin raised his baton, but Eric Brown moved faster, placing himself between them. "Stop." Brown's voice carried authority from years of service. "Look at what you're about to do. Really look." The boy behind him trembled but stood his ground. Phones recorded from every angle as Brown faced his former colleagues, arms spread wide. The image would become iconic, a police officer turned protector of protesters. "Step aside, Eric," Kevin ordered, his grip tightening on the baton. "Don't make us go through you." Michael Harris moved forward, his presence commanding attention. "Officer Kevin, your body camera is on. The world is watching. Make the right choice." The tension crackled. Other officers in the line began to shift uncomfortably, some lowering their shields. The moment reflected a deeper conflict within the force itself. Brown reached slowly for his phone. "I've been documenting everything," he announced. "Every illegal order, every excessive force incident, every cover-up. It all ends today." Angela stepped forward, addressing the officers. "Each of you has a choice. Be part of the problem or part of the solution. There's no middle ground anymore." Kevin's baton wavered. Behind him, several officers removed their helmets. The gesture spread like a wave through the police line, a silent but powerful statement. Brown continued filming as more officers broke rank, some joining the protesters, others simply stepping aside. The confrontation had become a catalyst for the very change they sought. Brown's footage spread across the internet like wildfire. The videos showed multiple incidents, officers planting evidence, excessive force, conversations about covering up misconduct. Most damning was footage of Officer Jenna Smith discussing the plan to target specific neighborhoods for aggressive policing. Within hours, Internal Affairs launched investigations. The police commissioner resigned. Officer Smith and several others were taken into custody, their arrests broadcast live on every major network. Michael Harris stood in the Senate chamber, his original police reform bill now strengthened by overwhelming public support. "This is not about revenge," he declared. "This is about transformation. About building a system that protects and serves everyone equally." The police union's resistance crumbled under the weight of public outrage. Even their staunchest supporters couldn't defend the exposed corruption. Reform measures passed with unprecedented speed. Eric Brown testified before the Police Oversight Committee, his former colleagues watching from the gallery. "I was part of the problem," he admitted. "But recognizing that was my first step toward being part of the solution." At a ceremony marking the passage of the Harris Police Reform Act, Michael addressed a crowd that included both protesters and police officers. "Today marks not an ending, but a beginning. Real change requires constant vigilance." Angela stood beside her husband, their hands clasped tight. In the audience, Brown sat with other reform-minded officers, wearing civilian clothes but carrying their badges, symbols of a commitment to a new way of policing. The city began implementing changes, new training programs, community oversight boards, stricter accountability measures. The Harris incident had become a turning point, a moment when the possibility of real change overcame decades of resistance. Officer Smith and others faced criminal charges. But their prosecution wasn't celebrated as revenge, instead, it was seen as a necessary step toward accountability. The true victory wasn't in punishment, but in transformation. As Michael and Angela left the ceremony, they passed Brown. No words were needed, their shared experience had helped forge a new path forward. The city of Chicago had become a model for police reform, proving that change was possible when people dared to stand up and demand it.